distance from Israel, not only at the Davos talks, walking out, but in very many different ways, comes to attention. But then I also have solid sources saying that all of this was agreed with the US, and that there is a solid Erdogan-Obama understanding, which is the reason why Turkey was on the top of his list for countries to be visited. And that US understood that the transition from secular military to civilian majority regime was inevitable, and that Erdogan and Davutoglu too, and Gül for that matter, the triple at the top, were the people they could use. In other words, it could be that Turkey is playing the role of presenting the pretext, and that Article 5 will be used for that purpose. Now, here I simply don't know. I myself have been taken in by the triple at the top, and those other informants I have say it was playing for the Arab street, and Erdogan did it extremely well. But the alliance with Israel is still there, and if Israel is ever stupid enough to bomb Iran, the landings in between will be on Turkish airports. And Turkish intelligence works closely with Israeli intelligence. Now, to that you may of course say, this is Middle East, my friend, what do you expect? What do you expect is what Middle East is about. It's in the middle of the middle of the middle of the middle of the East, or whatever it is, West Asia. I simply don't know, but my short-term prediction is yours. My hope would be attention to solutions, and that there would be some forces in the Arab world, also inside Syria, that could come up with something. I've indicated what I would believe in, according to the people I've talked with. Could be other solutions, and that would somehow make war look irrelevant. I've had a couple of cases of that type in my experience, and well, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Long answer. Does it make sense to you? What do you think?
Yeah, I think so, because...
Where does Erdogan stand? Where is he?
I think at this point, Erdogan is, as you said, internally, domestically, he is in the point that, like, he's transforming Turkey in that sense, like from military to civilian power. But regarding external power, sometimes he gives different signs, and this confuses international world. Especially, for example, right now he's in China. Actually, he returned back from China. But why did he go to China? Because, you know, China actually rejected involving in Syria in UN in meeting, as you know, like with Russia. So probably they're working on backtrack. They're working on backtrack negotiations with probably China and also Russia to involve in Syria. But regarding Erdogan's steps in Syria issue, he seems very legitimate. He seems himself very legitimate to involve, and because of the people are under oppression of Assad regime, and like those people are mostly like Sunni people, and they are under like structural violence in your terms. So Erdogan has responsibility to escape those people from this violence. So he has this legitimate idea regarding this issue.
By doing so, Sunni Shia becomes a key fault line even more. And that one is not going to cut away. So you then have that one to struggle with for generations maybe to come. But he knows that, Davutoglu knows that. And Davutoglu proclaimed policy, good relations to all neighbors. I think you have about 8 of them. It's a beautiful program, and very much was done. Much of it, for instance, with, and that is very important, with Armenia. And not understood in the US at all. So I just simply don't know. I must admit, I have 2 different interpretations of Erdogan. I want to watch it, but I would like to say something about China. I have had very close contact with people very high up in China. I have been lecturing twice at the party school for the Central Committee, which is quite some place for a professor to be, you see. And my last lecture was on the possible coming decline of the communist dynasty of China. And I've never been invited to State Department to ask about the decline and fall of the US empire. They can take it. If I should say something about Chinese foreign policy, it's extremely sophisticated. Extremely sophisticated. And at a level where two of their basic doctrines is avoid encirclement of China and avoid confrontation with the US. For that reason, they abstained from voting in the Libya case. In this case, they voted against. I think a basic reason was that it took some time for them to understand what Libya was about. Libya was about one thing: whether the central bank of a country should be private or state. It is okay that it is a state bank if the country is friendly. If it is not, it should be private. So 2 days after, according to one famous US general, 9/11, the White House received from, the Pentagon received from the White House the list of 7 countries that had central banks that were state banks and were not friendly to the US. 7 countries that should be handled. And I'd like to give you the list. 2 of them starts with an I, Iran and Iraq. This was in 2001. 2 of them start with an L, Libya and Lebanon. And 3 of them start with an S, Syria, Sudan and Somalia. You will find after that time that the US has been at war, either at war or close to it, in all of them. Now, let us now say that the top Chinese leadership sees it the same way as I see it, and many people see it. I'm not saying it was the only reason, I'm just saying it was a key reason. There are always many reasons for things. If they do that, they will vote against, because they think that the war is for something totally different from what they claim it is about. Now, they probably have an agreement already with the Sunnis that the state bank will be privatized. And what many people did not catch happened in April last year, after the Benghazi revolt, that the Benghazi decided that the central bank should be privatized. They did not decide anything about parliament and elections. The first decision was the privatization of the state bank. And then you can look into Gaddafi's plans for the state bank. So I think that was the reason for the no. The Russian no was that they have military bases, they have navy bases. And this is an old ally from the Cold War time. Both of them see it as a balance to Israel. Important. And they also, under the present Shia rule, since Iran is an observer in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which plays a very big role, and it's almost neglected by the Western media, SCO. They see, of course, the Assad regime as a Shia regime. Now, the Assad regime is a gunner. That's very, very clear. And although I try to understand why he's fighting on, and I've tried to give him some reasons for it, it's obvious that that will not survive very long. So I just wanted to add that to it, to try to make the situation even more complicated. Please.
My name is Saba, and thanks for the lecture. But I have a question and kind of reservation about, promoting China in a way, because China, I don't see China any different than the developmental state that is promoting and actually working towards, capitalist system. And prospering on that kind of system. And I don't see any egalitarianism in that kind of system that China is pursuing. And also, I have a very strong reservation about the role China has in Africa. And it's way of handling things when it comes to dictatorial states. Eritrea, one of those states being Eritrea, which I'm well aware of. So I think I don't know how you kind of balance that out. Being critical of those countries that are critical of the West, but at the same time are very abusive and very suppressive of their own population or citizens, and also the economic system that's not really egalitarian as far as I'm concerned.
When it comes to China, you can safely put all U.S. newspapers aside as source of information and shut off your television. And NPR won't help you any. You have to go to internet and maybe Chinese sources. Al Jazeera will teach you a lot. That does not mean that there are not critical points about their policy, but I'd like to try to give you an image of what they try to do. You have to go back 500 years in history. You have to go back to the basic shock in Chinese history, which was around 1500. And you see, if what I say now is new to you, you have had bad history books, because it's very elementary. From 500 Anno Domini to 1500, 1,000 years, the world was Asian. Trade was globalized. There was something that what we call the Silk Road, which is a totally wrong term. First of all, it was only a little bit about silk, and it was not a road. It was an enormous sea lane of trade that went from the eastern coast of China through what today we call Southeast Asia, South Asia, Middle East, and where did it end? It ended in Somalia. It was the richest country in Africa. It was an almost seamless cooperation between Buddhists in the East and Muslims in the West. It lasted 1,000 years. This is the world China wants to recreate. This is the world China wants to recreate. How was it destroyed? By the Portuguese and the English. The Portuguese came up the eastern coast of Africa, burnt the Muslims alive in their mosques, came in the name of their kings, and the English did the same, whereas the Muslims and the Buddhists did not have kings. They had the system, dynasties in China, but the Buddhist merchants were not acting in their name, they were acting in the name of commerce. And they destroyed the whole thing, the Portuguese first, and the English came and then took it over. China wants to recreate it. Chinese politics in Africa is a politics that will probably benefit Africa enormously, in the sense of having Africa as a major trade partner. But African governments reciprocate is not very strange, because China does not demand Western democracy, Western human rights, and Western rule of law. They demand a recreation of cooperation for mutual and equal benefit. And at the same time, they give to Africa something which Africa never got from the West. How do you lift the bottom up? Let me say a word about that. Since there are very few people in the US who even know how, or even are interested in knowing how China lifted 400 million up from misery in the countryside to lower middle class living in skyscrapers, with the problems that puts them into: loneliness, alienation, suicide for some, and so on. In no way the perfect, but at least lifting out of misery. Well, China said the unit of development is the community. It's not the individual by giving fellowships to gifted students, which is the Western way. some of them are sitting in this room. The fellowship, by picking people from the developing countries and making them your bridgeheads for dominating those countries, by imbuing them with your theories. The West has done that in an enormous extent. Nor is it the country as a whole, because the country as a whole is run by elites. And if you try to develop the country as a whole, the elite will pocket it. That summarizes fairly well Western technical assistance. Individual-centered and country-centered. And we've been doing that, let us say, for 50 years, since the wave of liberation, independence in the 1960s. So the Chinese say, select the poorest community, go into the poorest community with a 5-pronged approach. The private sector, the public sector, the NGO sector, the technical sector, and the coordinating sector. In China, that's the party. About the party, much can be said. It is not the Western party. It is not the Western party having a dictatorship. There are 6 parties in China. It's something else. That they run the country, no doubt about it. There are 70 million members. That is only 5% of the population. So if you will, you can call it a 5% dictatorship, if you want to put it that way. However, what do? You give microcredits not to individuals, but to small companies, on the condition that the companies, A, produce satisfied some basic needs. That means food, clean water, it means housing, cheap housing, polyclinics, cheap education building, medical herbs, whatever. And condition number 2, that you employ the most needy. The people who are at the brink of starving, who cannot read and write. It is not the AFL-CIO average redneck worker to employ. It's the most marginal in society. The efficiency is minimal. You do not do it for the efficiency. You do it for them to produce what they need to have a better life. After some time, they will pay back the credit. They will sell their goods at a reasonable price to the environment. After a couple of more years, they have money in the pocket, and then they go to the supermarket and become party to the economy. The Chinese call this system copy communism, or communal capitalism. In other words, the communists focus on basic needs, and the capitalists focus on the market, combining it. Now, try to launch that in the US. Your difficulty will start with the word copy communism in the very beginning. Just try it. Try it 1 minute and see how far you come, communication-wise. Africans have no difficulty understanding it. You should not be surprised if you find Chinese all over Africa, and if you find the Africans by and large accepting it, by and large. Giving to Africa a higher position in the world and trying to solve the problem of the fantastic misery created partly by the West. I'll only add one thing. When I was sitting next to the Deputy Foreign Minister of the Central Committee, she was asking, do you have any idea for China and Africa? And I said, how about building a 4-lane highway through from Dar es Salaam to Kinshasa, and a 4-lane highway from Somalia to Dar es Salaam. And instead of going around Cape de Good Hope, have ships going from the Kinshasa port at the coast to Rio de Janeiro, Porto Alegre, La Plata, Montevideo, Buenos Aires, and so on. And you would connect south, 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 Latin America, Africa, Asia. And you would have the Silk Road extended to Latin America. Now she looked at the map, we looked at the map, we had a big map lying on the floor. Quite interesting to sit with somebody like that with a map in front of you. And she was asking enormous amounts of detailed questions. So when that road comes, I'm in for a commission. It could be a small one, 1 per mil or 1 per mil or 1 per mil would be enough to sustain us for some time. Please.
Hi, I'm Ryan. Great to meet you. Thank you so much for being here.
You see, could you come a little bit closer? It's not your fault, it is my hearing could be better.
So my name's Ryan. Thank you for being here. It's really an honor to be in your presence after
My pleasure.
knowing about you for so long. So you talked a lot about, we're talking about China, obviously, and you mentioned resource scarcity, not scarcity, but clean water and access to resources. Could you speak a little bit about what your position is on the environment as a possible cost of human evolution, societal evolution, as we continue to evolve and embark on trading endeavors? Does the environment have to be a cost, like it has been in many cities in China, for example?
When it comes to transforming the economy in the direction of green values, including environment in general and energy in particular, it's China number 1, Germany number 2. US is down in the 20s. That's partly due to the very strong lobbies in the US Congress, from West Virginian coal, for instance, from Texas oil and things of that kind. And the lobbies being very powerful, and the lobbies on the green side not being that powerful. Maybe G Street instead of J Street, G Street for Green Street in Washington would change all that. But you see, I remember in 2009 there was a conference in Chongqing. I was one of the invitees. It was organized by the American Friends Service in conjunction with a very important Chinese organization, the Chinese People's Organization for Disarmament and Peace. Well, whether it is the Chinese People's Organization, I'm not quite sure. But anyhow, it was there. We were invited to the car factory, the biggest car factory in Chongqing. And they said yes, in the international crisis of 2008, there was a decline in our export. China is today the world's biggest car manufacturer. The biggest firms are General Motors, Volkswagen, and Toyota is now number 3. Now, but the biggest country is China. Then he said, the Chinese strategy against the crisis was to lift the bottom further up so that you could get more domestic demand stimulating the economy. Not foreign trade, when foreign trade is tough. However, he said, in year 2017, this factory will produce electric cars acceptable from all green points of view for the whole world. It will be the major manufacturer. In year 2012 comes our trial batch. 2013 we start serious production. In 2017 it will be the world. Now, is that boasting? Well, of course it is boasting too. So how does he get that idea? Because it has been through the party machine. The party is a dialogue machine according to the W principle. And the W principle is very well known also in the West. You get an idea from the top, it's sent down to the bottom. The bottom discusses it, sends it back in revised form. It is sent down again in a still more revised form. Then it is discussed again and come up again. The Chinese Communist Party is based on that. An enormous dialogue machine that takes 5 years to prepare a 5-year plan. Now, when the head of the party in China makes a speech every 5 years about the coming 5 years plan, better listen. There is a little bit of work behind it. Our society has nothing corresponding to that work. Absolutely nothing. Is there enough variety of opinion inside the Chinese Communist Party? Well, I met a number of them, and they are cats and dogs. They're extremely different. How were you recruited into the party? By university degree. 70 million has as a majority university graduates. What does the Politburo do in the afternoon after they've had a meeting? They invite top intellectuals to lecture to them. It's the old Confucian respect for intellectuals. Very far from the party that Mao Zedong led. But it would not be against Mao Zedong's thinking. So having said that, I'm just saying that it has to be taken seriously. And I think we will see China as a leader. They are producing solar energy collectors, solar energy panels, much cheaper than anybody else. They try to transport it in a green way and so on. So watch China. And have an excursion, take a trip, talk to them, find out what happens. And just put Washington Post aside, New York Times and such things. Put it aside. They are quite good at some other aspects, things, but not about China. I remember when the speech was given in year 2007 by Hu Jintao, the then leader of the party, who's now getting out. It's a 5-year period, and this fall they had a total change, almost total. For the first time, they are not taking the people appointed by Deng Xiaoping, because his appointees have already served. He spoke 5 hours. My wife and I were in Beijing to listen to it. We were not invited. We listened to the TV. 5 hours. He was beating Castro by 1 hour. And it had an enormous richness of ideas. I made an article about the 26 major ideas. I read the New York Times editorial about Mr. Hu Jintao's propaganda speech, not having understood one single point of it. He said, for instance, we have had tremendous growth, but we now have 3 major contradictions. Between rich and poor, between city countryside and east-west in the country, and we have a major deficit in democracy. What did he mean by that? He didn't mean that we're going to have multi-party national elections. He said much more dialogue inside the party, much more dialogue between the Communist Party and the 5 other parties. One of them is Chiang Kai-shek's former party. Much more dialogue at the local level and elections at the local level. And we might be interested in elections in companies. Now tell an American CEO, how about democracy in your company? And having the workers maybe throwing you out. How would you like that one? How about having different parties and opinions among the workers, or all the employees, and so on? Maybe you would be interested in having the customers also saying what I actually say or think about your products. Things of that kind. Could it be that they are ahead of us a couple of points in democracy and behind on some others? Take China seriously.
ESCAR is closing 30 years, and you invited us to consider American and Taliban in conversations that we are interested in. But I was wondering if you have other dreams or invitations that the 15th conflict and this location in Washington would justify or encourage or suggest.
You know, I started by saying it's much our fault. We have not been able to communicate. We haven't found the formula. Maybe it has to be put as a rock song or something, I don't know. I can tell you my formula for peace. It is actually in this book, Peace Mathematics. And the formula for peace is P equals, it's a formula, not an equation. That's not the same thing. It's a definition. So you have a fraction in the denominator. On top you have equity, harmony. Equity times harmony, by harmony. Equity means mutual cooperation for mutual and equal benefit. Harmony means that I suffer your suffering and I enjoy your joy. These two are not bad formulas for a good marriage. Not bad formulas. If you have inequitable cooperation and joy when your spouse is suffering, and suffering when your spouse has a career, you are ripe for a divorce. Now, in the denominator, I have capacity to reconcile after traumas. In other words, the conflicts of the past. And they have capacity to creatively solve contradictions, the conflicts of the present. So if those capacities are high, excuse me, it's actually the opposite. The opposite, I'm sorry. It's a minus in front of it. If those capacities are missing, and you just have the traumas of the past lying there all the time, even increasing, and the conflicts unresolved, whatever you do in terms of cooperation on the surface at the top and the harmony can come to nothing. They have four formulas, and I always test them out on marriages, including my own. And what it means in concrete practice. What does it mean? Diana and I are co-authors on the book of Reconciliation, which I don't think Diana has forgotten to put it on the table. I think by chance there are some copies here. So we are sort of celebrating the launching of that book with you. It came out the same day as this one. It was Friday, 1.5 weeks ago, and I took the plane to Oslo. They're printed in Norway, and they printed electronically 50 copies of each, which is Diana's for the radio. And you can help her converting it into $20 per copy. Now, having said that, you have a formula. How the heck do I communicate that? I'm not quite sure that the formula in the book called Peace Mathematics is the ideal way. But there must be some way somewhere. Because I have tested that formula on so many people. I don't, must have been 1,000 altogether. It took me only 60 years to develop it, starting in 1951. Last year it was more or less clear. And almost everybody says, but that's it. That's it. You see, democracy is such a superficial little tiny scratch on state theory. You need much more than that. It's an expression of something, and it is good for one problem, peaceful transition from one regime to the next. But that's not all that peace is about. So I can only say I am always canvassing this fantastic country from end to end to try to find the vehicle of communication. And of course one always ends up in Oregon and Washington State and North California, one ends up in the green part. And would I like to live there? Do I find it boring? Yes, I find it boring. I love it and I find it boring. And I'm very happy that people like to live there. Thank you so much for doing it. And, yeah, so not only says I'm a degenerate person out for more fun, than even Portland, Oregon is able to come up with. Now, having said that, I'm sure there is some leverage somewhere. I'm sure there is. I am not even looking at political science and social sciences. One reason being that they are so positivistic, so steeped in data, so governed by the past, that the creativity is lost. If medical people had only been studying the diseases of the past and never thought creatively on therapy, we would have been where we were a couple of million years ago. So, there's something to learn there. I just say it, Andrea. I'm not sure that I know what the answer is, but I can tell you the answers I find other places. BRICS is a formula. My name in Brazil, Russia, less India though, China and South Africa, no problem communicating. They understand these things immediately. India somewhat less, because sooner or later we come to caste. And we come to a key problem. A very key problem, which they have difficulties handling also intellectually. So if we say brts, it's less pronounceable. When I talk with the gypsies, they have now gradually changed their capitalist philosophy. So they are ready for copy communism any day now. But they have to waste a couple of years hating Germany first. And I only hope that that could be done quickly and that Germany could come to its senses. In other words, the picture is mixed. And to finalize that, when I say that one key to peace is cooperation for mutual and equal benefit, the West picks up mutual benefit, but not equal. The West always wants an edge. And the basic edge is that you shall accept our peace thinking. Human rights, only individuals. There is only one collective human right, self-determination for nations. But only if Western lawyers accept it. And those lawyers happen to be at George Washington, Georgetown, Oxford and Cambridge. International lawyers at those four places are called upon to decide it. Ain't good enough. Rule of law. Western law suffers from an incredible weakness. It is only rule of law for acts of commission, not for acts of omission. You can get away with doing nothing, unpunished. Other cultures in the world equalize acts of omission and acts of commission. So for that reason we have laws against aggression, against attacking another country, except under certain UN conditions. But we have no law saying you should do your best to reduce structural violence, to reduce inequity. So inequity is sailing on, and we even have economists who produce measures of growth without producing measures of dispersion. I always compare them to a geographer who is good on latitudes but not on longitudes. I wouldn't take my position from that kind of geographer. I wouldn't do that. I would send him back to school, which I generously do with economists. Back to school, please. Yes, back to school. The question is which school, and then I get into difficulty.
I have a question. First, thank you very much for sharing your knowledge with us. I had a question to understand how you view sport as an effective tool in increasing togetherness and sharing and creating what at least Boldian called a civic global culture of peace. So.
Ambiguous. The countries, there is a correlation between number of gold medals and number of wars emanating from the country. The more gold medals, the more belligerent the country. So there must be something a little bit, but you can say these are big countries and the bigger the country, but when you divide with the population you still get the same correlation. I think for teamwork, fantastic. That would favor team sport more than individual sport. Fantastic. For respecting rules, fantastic. But the philosophy, winning is not everything, it's the only thing, catapults the word winning up to the top. So of course you have the image of two ways of playing badminton. Getting the other side not to catch the ball, or the two cooperating in keeping the ball in the air as long as possible. Okay, that would be more peace, mutual and equal benefit. Till the point where those two start competing with another team or two. See who can keep the ball in the air the longest time. The West would come up with that one immediately and maybe make it an Olympic sport. So my conclusion, ambiguity. Ambiguity. But most things in this world is ambiguous. That's what yin-yang philosophy teaches us. Even life is ambiguous. It has a counterpart called death. Death and life go together. It's the yin and yang. And death may get the upper hand quickly, early, or later. If you want to keep alive a long time, I can tell you one thing, for heaven's sake, don't retire. Keep on working, be inspired. Be inspired. And by that try to inspire others. But one can play on the good side, so maybe it could improve sports.
Just a follow-up question. Do you see?
And I would like just to say one more thing.
Yeah,
you know, the teams tend to be national, so for that reason you reify the state system. So how about a mixed Chinese-American team playing a Pakistani-Indian team, but not cricket, because the Pakistani and Indian would win with their hands down. So we had to find something like baseball.
Exactly. Yeah, I work with a nonprofit, Peace Players International, and they have programs in Cyprus, South Africa, Northern Ireland, and
All of that.
Middle East, and that's exactly what actually they do, is they integrate the team so that there are Israelis and Palestinians playing together, Catholics and Protestants, not against, but together. So
I think it is important, and all of that should be done. But there is no way in which you can have a mixed philharmonic orchestra between Palestinians and Israelis and thereby solve the problem. The problem is political. And one solution is indicated on this list, the six-state solution. You simply make a confederation of Israel with 5 bordering Arab countries. It will work beautifully. It does beautifully. But who would be the functionaries running that community? Those who had played together in kindergarten. Those who had overcome their prejudices. Those who had learned how to cooperate. Had learned mutual respect and things of that kind. So in that sense important, as long as you don't see it as the solution.
thank you.
So it is our task to be knowledgeable about all such things. I've been living with this for 60 years, so I think I have heard most things, and my ears are still fixed here, most of them. But I'm amazed how much more you can create, just by having a spirit of creativity.
Hi, I have a question here. I'm
Please.
Canada, and I come from South Asia, but I look more towards East Asia as well. And
You come from?
I'm a Naga from India.
From
I
India.
share border with East Asia as well.
Okay.
So, in a way, we are caught in a conflict of capitalists versus communists. But when I look at America today, in a way, we are trying to fill the world as like West, or like everybody should become like America, which doesn't really fit in when we look at Asia or Africa or Middle East. And there's a lot of conflict, much more conflict coming out of it. And I feel like even in the teaching itself, we are lost on which ideology to go for. So as a student of the peace and conflict, what do you suggest sitting in a West classroom?
I think the United States as a model country to be imitated is fading extremely quickly. And people who know the US, who look at the economy, who look at the increasing inequality, are amazed of how badly the US is managing its own affairs. It's a question of how much you know and how little you know. But the kind of thing that I'm saying, just to take one point, who is buying the US bonds? The state debt. China has stopped. Japan has stopped. European Union has stopped. Do you know who is buying it now? It's the US Federal Reserve Bank. By 61% of it. The US Federal Reserve Bank, which is a club of 70 banks, it's a private central bank, owns the United States of America.
You're sounding more like Ron Paul every day,
It's incredible how quickly. Now, let us say that you have 100 such things. If you know 10 of them, it looks already bad. If you know 90 of them, the US will not be a model country. Maybe we don't need a model country. Maybe it would be better not to have a model country. But better to have values and good ideas and creativity and make our own. Look at, let us say, the Chief Minister of Gujarat in your country. Look at Modi, the possible coming Prime Minister. Extremely effective economically. Extremely bad in terms of Hindu-Muslim relations. And you have a Hindu region, roughly speaking, from Nepal to Sri Lanka, and a Muslim region from Morocco to the Philippines. And they meet in India, 160 million Muslims in India. Now, how is that one going to be solved? So, you see, these are problems to pay attention to. And I don't think you come very far by having US as a model country.
You want to get the last question? Sure. Yeah, Mike, will you take one more question?
Yes, one more.
Yeah, well, since I have you here, and I hate to make you feel like an old rock star who has to play the old hits, but you're probably maybe our favorite theorist here, I would say, and I'm interested in your method of theory construction because it's something that we struggle with. And in particular, if we go back and look at the old structural violence argument and look at the cultural violence argument, it seems that there's a specter haunting your work, and it's Karl Marx. That is, but you break with him in some ways, which seems strategic to me, and I wonder what this is. That because you could say structural violence, in fact, you say it's like exploitation, but I don't use that word. And ideology is another word that's like cultural violence. So, is there something essentially different, or is there a reason why? Because in a sense, some of these arguments are like Marxist arguments, and I'm just curious how you've worked with that in your own thinking and why you've broken with it in that way.
Thanks for your fantastic question. I'd love to try to answer it and reflect on it. In 1973, I was the first Karl von Ossietzky professor in Germany. And a group of German professors wanted to sort of test me, and they said, "Where do you stand, Professor Galtung?" And I said, about 60% liberal, 60% Marxist, and the remaining 80% something Asian. Something combination of Buddhist and Taoist. Now they drew the conclusion that I didn't know about percentages, and it didn't work very well. But I could still answer that way, you see. But I added, you need 200% because peace studies are quite difficult, so you have to be inspired from many sources. And of course one is inspired, but I think I'm mainly Taoist, Buddhist inspired. You asked for theory information. I think I come very far by buying two Taoist assumptions, holism and dialectics. Now, holism means, these are sort of big words, so let us get them down to the ground. Holism simply means use many variables. What is called a rich, a dense description of a phenomenon. So, if I talk about something called imperialism, and I often get the question, is it economic, military, political, cultural? And I say all of the above. Now, 4 is not very many, but it's better than just one of them. And then I would look at synchrony and synergy, but then comes the word dialectics. And dialectics, down to the ground, force and counterforce. Whenever you push in some direction, be sure of one thing, there will be a counterforce. And if you think that you can just push, then you're a little bit naive. Now, if you want an image of the totally non-holistic and totally non-dialectic, or basically non-dialectic, is called golf, playing golf. From 1 to 18, there is a slight dialectic with wind and things of that kind, but if you should reconstruct golf so it became similar to the world, the golf balls would unite, there would be many more of them, the holes would disappear, the holes would make a trap for the golf player, and of course the golf ball would be turned back to the player and things of that kind. There would be an ample supply of extra balls and additional holes, and all of that would be dynamic and moving. Then you get an image of the world. So what I'm saying, if you want to train an idiot in international relations, let him play golf as often as possible. That's it. Absolutely. So when I appoint a country as a country in retirement, I'm counting the number of golf clubs they have and golf courses. So when the golf courses are increasing, you know which way it's going. But having said that, I then try to capture some holism, and I try to capture a dialectic in it. Arab Spring. If you think you started with self-immolation of somebody in Tunisia and then moving eastwards, you have a linear image of imitation, an extremely poor image. The holism will inevitably bring in history, and suddenly you see 3 Arab revolts against empires, against the Turkish Empire, against the Western Empire, and against the US-Israel Empire. And the US-Israel Empire is based on having elites appointed that can do whatever they want as long as they're loyal to US-Israel. US-Israel will turn the other way until the revolt came. Now, who is winning that one? It's another question. It's quite interesting to see Mr. Suleiman. And from the very beginning, I said, watch Mr. Suleiman. He's the person to watch. So he now is becoming presidential candidate. That's dialectic. Game coming up. So I try to work that way. And you'll find in this scheme here relatively holistic descriptions of the conflicts. And then the yin and yang of these two, the solution orientation and the victory orientation, if you will. So that should be basic. And I just tried to put it down on the ground as 45 cells in the scheme. Now, your question about Marx. Much more important to me than Marx is Taoism, which is where he has it from. The idea of dialectic, force counter force, yin yang, light, dark, and so on. And the answer to my friend there about sports, I could give that answer, and I gave it about Turkey. The ambiguity of things, you see. When our task is to support the side that is more peaceful, well knowing that when that side comes up on top, there will be new contradictions. So the game never ends. And now, what happened was that Matteo Ricci, a Jesuit, as Andrea knows very well.
Yeah, very well.
Very, very well.
I visited the tomb and...
Well, he traveled to the east to convert the pagans and came back as a fantastic missionary for Taoism and Confucianism.
Yeah.
To put a little bit simply, but it was like that. Didn't reject his Christianity, he didn't do that, in no way at all, and that is very interesting.
But learn from them.
Enriched it.
Yeah.
Enriched it.
Who is this, Johan? Who are you talking about?
Matteo
Matteo
Ricci.
Ricci.
Matteo Ricci. And you see, his writings were picked up by nobody less than Leibniz, who wrote a book called Die Denkweise der Chinesen, how the Chinese think. And that book was picked up by a young, brilliant German called Hegel.
Yep.
And his book was picked up by another brilliant German called Karl Marx.
Yep.
So there you have the history. Then there is a tiny little thing. They always quote some Greeks in order to make it sound Western. So that's the usual trick.
Jacques Derrida is just Taoism again.
Yeah, precisely. It's a little bit like mathematics. And so on. You can say I have a kind of sadistic pleasure in finding the lies in all that, and there is something to that. But anyhow,
Right.
I want to distribute it all over the world, you see. So, it's the dialectic part. Now, when it comes to describing capitalism, there is nobody, Marx has no rival. And his prediction of finance capitalism being worse than industrial capitalism is very important. You see, you can base it on one thing, if you will. Industrial capitalism, according to Marx, had the problem that we had to keep the workers alive. So we had to pay them the minimum, and what is on top of that in terms of your profit is called meerwert, plus value, and you pocket it. And more or less, to some extent. But he was wrong on one point, because with automation you can get rid of them. And by hiring workers from the third world, you can get rid of the locals. You can move your plant to the third world. So the industrial capitalists are handling much of that. But finance capitalism doesn't need any workers. They just need a gang sitting in Goldman Sachs and tricking the Muppets, as the traitor said, you know. This guy who resigned the other day. And all you need that. So you don't have any trouble. So the bonuses that accrue to the finance capitalist, I must say, if I were an industrial capitalist, I would be jealous. How can I manage my industry? How can I exploit my workers, the few that are left, so that I can also get bonuses of that type? Marx saw much of that. I've now tried to, well, I would say, improve his theory a little bit. But when it comes to capitalism, brilliant. When it comes to alternatives to capitalism, nothing. Don't find anything of interest. I find him a traditional positivist, empiricist, and he's predicting things that they do in positivism too. Things are getting worse, So the falling profit rate. And to say that didn't happen in this and that country is no argument against Marxism, because Marx was not talking about national capitalism, but about world capitalism as a system. And as a system, the impoverishment of the proletariat is there for everybody to see. So that's where I see it. I see contradiction as a much broader concept, but as a specialist on capitalism, he stands there. He's very popular in Germany because he was German. So he became a part of the German national ritual. So the student revolt in '68 was Marxist, not because they were communist, because they were German. And they wanted a theoretician who was not from Harvard. And whatever you can say about Karl Marx, he was not from Harvard. Much more can be said about that. Book number 3 in the pile that Diane has is called 50 Years, 25 Intellectual Explorations. And there is a lot about theory formation, very concrete. It's a kind of epistemology of peace studies, as I see it.
Well, Johan, it was wonderful as usual. Thank you so much for your time and your energy.